Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being, you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's true crime video. I'm so happy we can meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow, in all this craziness today, you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the tragic murder of 16-year-old Laurie Show. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. One of us. One of us. And you can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter if you want. They're both Bratterstein. But no pressure. All right, now that I'm done begging you to join my cult, we can go ahead and get into this video. Now, this is a case, rather, that was suggested to me by a number of subscribers. So I want to thank you all for your suggestions. I want to thank David, Liliana, Anna, or Anna, not sure, Elena, and Joe. Of course, Joe G. I saw all your comments. I've been seeing them, and I was gonna get to it, and now I finally got to it. And I can see why this case affected you guys so much, because wow. Because one, it's horribly sad, and two, there's just so much shit involved in it, from the stalking to the actual murder to the numerous legal proceedings that followed it. It's just like a lot to hear, and it's really, really sad and like hits you right in the heart because this girl was so young and killed for literally no reason. So it's a lot to hear, you know? With that said, I'm going to tell you all about it today, right now. I guess that's all I have to say. Yeah, pretty quick intro, huh? Who am I? What have I done with myself? Anyway, everyone, come, gather around, and let me tell you the story of the tragic murder of 16-year-old Laurie Show. So, I want to start this video off with a quote from Laurie Show's mother. Her name's Hazel Whitehead, and she said of her daughter Laurie, and I quote, "People say it's time to let Laurie rest in peace, but she didn't die peacefully." On the first day of winter, December 20th, 1991, 16-year-old Laurie Show was murdered in her home. She was stabbed multiple times, and her throat was slashed ear to ear. And this poor girl was found in her own bedroom by her own mother, bleeding heavily, but still alive. So Laurie's mother sat down and held her 16-year-old daughter as she bled to death. But before her life was ended, she was able to say the name of the person who murdered her. Sounds pretty open and closed, right? Like it should be pretty easy to catch this person and for this person to be in jail forever, right? Not so simple. Laurie Michelle Show was born January 27th, 1975 to her parents, Hazel and John, and she was named for her mother, with her mother's middle name being Laurie. Laurie was the couple's only child, and they saw Laurie as their little miracle because of the way she came into the world, with her umbilical cord wrapped around her neck, ironically similar to the way she would exit this world as well. Laurie's parents tried their hardest to make their marriage work when Laurie was younger, as they were both raised to fix a relationship, not end it, but it was never able to be salvaged, and the two ended up separating, and after that, Laurie spent most of her time living with her mother. Laurie was a happy kid who loved to swim and loved twirling the baton when she was young and loved playing with her friends at daycare. She was also a pretty fearless and tough kid, often getting herself hurt and breaking her little bones so often that her mother wondered if something was wrong with her, but no, she was just a klutz. She was just a sweet girl, the type of little girl who fell in love with a fish. She had been out fishing and she fell in love with this fish. So instead of cooking it or releasing it back into the wild, she convinced her parents to let her keep it, and they drove it home, the 2-hour drive, in a bucket of pond water, and the whole drive, she pet and talked to the fish. If that's not the cutest thing you've ever heard in your life, I really don't know what is. As Laurie got older, her and her mother, their relationship changed. They went from just being mother and daughter to also being friends, which is something that I think most people hope they'll have with their parents. I know when I was a teenager, me and my mom did not get along at all, but now that we're both adults, we have a much better relationship, and that's the road that Laurie was going down. Her and her mom had become very, very close about the time that she was murdered. And when she was murdered, she was a 16-year-old sophomore at Conestoga. If you're from the area, please tell me how to say that. Conestoga Valley High School. And she was a sophomore. I don't know if I said that. She was a sophomore. And she had dreams of graduating and going to cosmetology school and eventually being a model. And at the time she was killed, she worked at a store called the Deb Shop, which was a woman's clothing store. And it was at this job where she was ruthlessly and tirelessly harassed by her future murderer, a girl named Lisa Michelle Lambert. Now, 18-year-old Lisa Michelle Lambert, who went simply by Michelle, started harassing Laurie Show in early 1991 after learning that Laurie and Michelle's boyfriend, a 20-year-old man named Lawrence Yunkin, had gone on a couple of dates while Lawrence and Michelle were on a break. They were on a break. Laurie and Lawrence had gone on a couple of dates, but it didn't really go anywhere, and Laurie wasn't that into it and ended up calling it off. And Laurie actually even told her mother that on the two's last date, Lawrence had date raped her, which is just so fucked up. But she didn't end up reporting it because she didn't want to cause any trouble. She didn't want it to be a whole thing. But news of this still did get back to Michelle. And it was shortly after Lawrence and Laurie's last date that Michelle and Lawrence got back together. And when she did learn that Laurie and Lawrence had gone on dates while the two were separated, she was fucking pissed. Michelle had dropped out of school as a teenager and had moved out of her parents' house, and this is when she moved in with her boyfriend Lawrence. The two were living together in a trailer in the woods because romance. And this man, this relationship, this baby was her whole world, and she saw Laurie as a threat to that. She was a very jealous person and became increasingly jealous of and obsessed with Laurie. She started to harass her verbally, assaulting her, threatening her, even showing up at Laurie's work. Like Laurie was a sales clerk, as I said, at the Deb Shop at the mall, and Michelle would just show up and continuously harass her, never giving her any peace. Michelle even showed up once while Laurie was in the parking lot of her work. She was standing outside with some friends, and Michelle and Lawrence drove up, saw Laurie. Michelle got out of the car, hit Laurie, slammed her head into the trunk of a car before leaving. And after this, Laurie was so scared that she started taking like other routes to get home, just doing whatever she could to try to avoid running into Michelle because Michelle was becoming a bit unhinged. And it got so bad that Laurie and her mother even went to the police station and filed an assault charge against her, just trying to do whatever they could to de-escalate the situation and make it stop because it got to a point where it was just too much. And this assault charge was filed less than a week before Laurie was murdered. Witnesses had reported that Michelle had expressed to them that she wanted to, quote, scare Laurie, then hurt her, then slit her throat. She stalked Laurie for months, calling her over and over at home, yelling profanities at both Laurie and her mother. She was just becoming like a lot. It was getting to be too much. She seemed to be losing it and blamed Laurie for ruining her life and the picture-perfect life that she was under the impression that she had created with Lawrence. And it got so bad that Hazel, Laurie's mom, even changed the house phone number so that she would just stop calling. Now, the morning of Laurie's attack and murder, and yeah, I said morning because this happened bright and early in the morning. Fuck, so, I mean, not any time of day is horrible, but like in the morning, you're all tired, you're all sluggish, you're barely like just trying to start existing, and something like this happens to you. It's so fucked up. But anyway, Hazel, her mother, was not home. Hazel had left the home that she and Laurie shared in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which if you've never been there, I haven't. I read up on it a little bit, and it is a really small, safe little piece of Americana. It was a very quiet and old-fashioned sort of town. There was even an Amish community that lived super close by, if that gives you any indication of the innocence there. Well, Hazel was out of the house because she had actually been tricked. She had been tricked by her daughter's murderers to be out of the house that morning. She had gotten a call the day before from someone claiming to be Mrs. Cooper, a guidance counselor at Laurie's school. And they said they wanted her to come in the next morning bright and early so that they could discuss an issue that Laurie was having at school where she had gotten in trouble with a boy. When Laurie heard about this, when she heard her mother say that she was going to meet about this, Laurie was very confused because she's like, what the fuck? That never happened. But her mother was going to go regardless because she's like, really? It didn't happen, Laurie? I'm sure it didn't happen, or whatever. I don't know their relationship. They were friends, but you know, kids lie. And girls lie about the things they be doing with boys sometimes, you know what I mean? So her mother left. And when she left, Laurie was in the bathroom getting ready for school. She left before 7 a.m., so it was like really early and too early for Laurie to go with her. She was in the bathroom, blow drying her hair, getting ready for the last day of school before Christmas break. Once Hazel arrived at the school, she found that the guidance counselor was not there and never ended up showing up. And there actually was no record of a meeting being on calendar between this guidance counselor and Hazel. So Hazel waited a little bit just to kind of see if this woman would show up, and she never did, so she headed home. When she arrived home, she was intercepted by a neighbor on her way into the house, and the neighbor was kind of concerned and was like, I was just wondering if everything was okay, because I heard like a lot of loud noise coming out of your apartment while you were gone just now. And Hazel didn't really freak out, because she's like, I have a 16-year-old daughter. Everything they do is loud as fuck, because teenagers are loud. So she was like, oh, I'm sure it's fine, it's fine. So she walks to her apartment, and that's when she sees that the front door is open. So she goes inside and starts looking for her daughter and starts calling out her name. Hazel first went into the bathroom where Laurie had been getting ready when she left, but she found that Laurie was not there, so she moved on to Laurie's bedroom. And this is where she found her 16-year-old child in terrible shape. She was laying on the floor in a puddle of her own blood, and as her mom looked closer, she saw that Laurie had a rope wrapped around her neck. So immediately her mom ran to the kitchen and she grabbed a knife. She came back and she like slipped her fingers beneath the rope and pulled it and cut off her daughter's neck. And this is when she found that her daughter was somehow still alive. Alive, but brutalized. She had been stabbed in the abdomen with one stab wound puncturing her lung and another that grazed her spine. She had several wounds to her head, several defensive wounds, and a 5-inch gash to her throat. She had been cut ear to ear, and it was about an inch deep. Hazel sat on the floor with her daughter, holding her in her lap, trying to, quote, hold her together. Those were her mother's exact words. And as Laurie laid there in her arms, she said the words to her mother, quote, Michelle did it. And then she said Michelle's name over and over before she started saying, I love you, over and over to her mother. She then got to the point where there was no more sound coming out of her, so she was just mouthing the words, I love you, until she died. Laurie was pronounced dead on the scene, and the autopsy report showed that her left carotid artery had been severed. Laurie's mother, Hazel, said of that moment, and I quote, I would not have made it if I had not been with her when she died. I look at it almost as a gift. I was with her when she passed into the next life. I didn't get that horrible phone call. It's just so sad, dude. I can't even imagine what that was like. And after Laurie died, her mother spent a lot of time in Laurie's bedroom. Even though that's where she was killed, her mother said that sitting there surrounded by her photos and her teddy bears is where she feels like her daughter is still the most alive to her. Police immediately started to interview people who were friends with Laurie and people who were friends with Michelle Lambert, because Hazel had told police what Laurie had said, what her dying words were, and had told the police who Michelle was, since Hazel was very familiar with Michelle. So police wanted to interview people to find the nature of their relationship, or their feud rather, and as they did, the more people they talked to, the more clear of a picture was painted. They found out that Michelle was obsessed, as I said. They found that she was constantly talking about how she wanted to hurt Laurie, how she wanted to kill Laurie, and how she had tried to recruit other people to help her hurt Laurie. She was talking to everybody like, would you like to help me hurt the 16-year-old child? Because that is my bread and butter. And she had even talked to one friend and asked this friend if she would help her kidnap Laurie, drive her out into the middle of nowhere, and slit her throat. So, with that information, it was a very quick turnaround, like a quick turnaround time for police to make an arrest. They actually went and arrested 3 people the same day. They arrested 18-year-old Lisa Michelle Lambert. They arrested 20-year-old Lawrence Yunkin, and they arrested Michelle's friend, 17-year-old Tabitha Buck. The 3 of them had been together at a bowling alley. Wow, my brain. Yes, the 3 were arrested at a local bowling alley. And initially, police didn't even know who Tabitha was. She wasn't on their radar or anything. But when they arrived at the bowling alley and they saw her, she had a big cut across her face. And they were like, how'd you get that cut, little girl? And quickly, Michelle jumped in and was like, oh, she got that cut because earlier today, me and Miss Tabitha here, we got in a fight with a couple of Latin girls. And she got cut in the face during the fight. And police were like, I fucking doubt it. And all three were brought down to the station for questioning. The assistant district attorney who ended up prosecuting the three in question said of this case, and I quote, "I think it was the fact that they were all middle-class youths with no mental illness. People just couldn't expect that this kind of thing could happen to that kind of people." I don't know about you, but I cannot say the word youths without thinking of Schmidt from New Girl. Youths, when they steal his tires when he's 29, you know what I mean? No, it's okay, it's fine, it's fine. So, the three were separated so that they could be interviewed individually, and almost immediately Lawrence was like, word vomit everywhere. He told them everything. He's like, listen, I had no idea they were going to do that. I knew they were going to Laurie's house, but I thought it was all a prank. I thought they brought the knife, because they brought a knife. I thought they brought the knife to cut Laurie's hair off as a prank, because that's the impression I was under. I did not know they were going to, like what they did, that I wasn't part of that. I dropped them off. I took Michelle the night before so that she can get items for the prank. She got a ski mask, she got rope, she got gloves, but it was all for a prank. Then I took them over in the morning. I dropped them off so that they could cut off her hair. I drove to McDonald's, ate a little food, came back 15 minutes later to meet them in the woods after they were done with the prank. And police were like, right. He said when he met the girls in the woods, they were covered in blood and had a weird smell to them. So he took them back to his trailer so that they could take showers and clean themselves up since they were covered in blood and smelled weird. And then they dropped Tabitha off at school because she was still 17 years old and had high school. He said that he and Michelle then proceeded to dispose of the evidence. He said that they washed the clothes that the girls had been wearing, and then they disposed of these clothes behind a Kmart in a trash bag, and that they then took the murder weapon, the knife, and a pair of bloody shoes and threw them in a nearby river. He tells police that when he asked Michelle, like, what the fuck, what happened, that Michelle told him that she had accidentally stabbed Laurie in the back, like, oops, whoops, I slipped, stabbed her in the back, didn't mean to do it. And after doing that, she was like, well, I then slit her throat to put her out of her misery because she was in so much pain I couldn't leave her like that. Sure. It just makes me so frustrated. So police immediately go to that Kmart to try to retrieve the bag of the clothing that had been worn at the time of the murders, and it was easy for them to find it because the clothes were actually in a pink trash bag, which I didn't even know exists. Does that exist? Can I be the extra type of bitch who has pink trash bags? Because I would love to. They retrieve the trash bag, and it does contain the clothes, and they later go to the river, and they retrieve the shoes and the murder weapon exactly where Lawrence said they would be. So this confirmed that at least part of his story was true, because there was evidence, physical evidence, that corroborated what he was saying. When police spoke to Michelle, Michelle's story was very different. Michelle told police that yes, she and Tabitha had been dropped off at Laurie's house that morning by Lawrence, but that was pretty much the only thing they did together was arrive together, because she quickly turned on her friend Tabitha and said that Tabitha did everything. Tabitha had attacked Laurie. Tabitha had killed Laurie. Was it Michelle's idea to go to Laurie's house? Yes, but that's because Michelle had had a change of heart. Had she stalked Laurie for months? Had she harassed Laurie for months? Had she beaten and abused Laurie for months? Yes, but now she was over it, water under the bridge, and she wanted to go in person to let Laurie know this. But as soon as they had gotten there, Tabitha just wasn't having it, okay? Tabitha and her knocked on the door. As soon as Laurie opened the door, Tabitha pushed her way in and immediately started attacking Laurie, fighting Laurie. The fight ended up spilling into Laurie's bedroom, where Laurie tried to grab for the phone, but Tabitha knocked it right out of her hands and wouldn't allow her to call for help. And then Tabitha started aggressively stabbing Laurie, and Michelle and her weak constitution couldn't handle it and ran out of the room and never saw how things played themselves out. This is Michelle's story. Now, Tabitha didn't tell police shit because she had spoken to an attorney and was advised not to talk, which is the smart thing to do. I'm not trying to tell you how to get away with murder, but always get an attorney. Always get an attorney. Even if you're innocent, get an attorney. Especially if you're innocent, get an attorney. But Tabitha had spoken to an attorney, and the attorney was like, don't say shit, so she didn't. So with that, both Tabitha and Michelle were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Lawrence was not, because they couldn't prove that Lawrence was there. They couldn't place him at the crime scene. Nobody's story was implicating him as being at the crime scene. So he actually cut a deal with the prosecution, whoever you cut deals with, where he would testify against both girls, and in exchange he would get a lighter sentence. Laurie Show was buried 2 days before Christmas, and in her hands she was holding a photo of her friends and classmates, and apparently 600 of her friends and classmates showed up and waited to say their goodbyes to her in the cold pouring rain because she was that loved. On March 19th, 1992, Lisa Michelle Lambert gave birth to a baby girl in prison, because you remember during this time she was pregnant with Lawrence's baby. She gave birth to a baby girl named Kristen, and Kristen was then taken from her and put into the custody of her parents, since both of this baby's parents were in jail. Lawrence and Michelle were both in jail, so the baby was being raised by Michelle's parents. So Michelle Lambert decided to do something that we don't see very often in these cases. Well, I don't know, maybe you fucking see it all the time. I don't see it very often when I cover these cases. And that's that she waived her right to a jury trial and decided instead to have her fate decided by one lone judge, which again, is something I don't see very much, so I thought it was interesting. This baby is hugging my lungs, I think. I don't know what he's doing in there, man. He's huge. The prosecution told the judge that Michelle Lambert was a dangerous woman, that she had stalked and tormented and harassed and hurt Laurie Show, 16-year-old Laurie Show, for months because she saw Laurie as a perceived threat to her relationship with Lawrence. She had told people over and over that she wanted to hurt Laurie, that she wanted to kill Laurie, specifically that she wanted to cut Laurie's throat, that she would do anything to get rid of her to protect her relationship and her family, which is so stupid because Laurie didn't even want Lawrence, but what the fuck ever. Michelle was stupid. And Michelle, when she was questioned, pretty much agreed to everything. She said that she did want to hurt Laurie and she did see Laurie as a threat, but that she never said she wanted to kill her, and she definitely never said she wanted to cut her throat. Another thing that Michelle did that not a ton of people do is she took the stand in her own defense. And it was at this point that she changed her story again. She said that it wasn't Tabitha and her who had went and killed Laurie. It was actually Tabitha and Lawrence who had killed Laurie. So stick with me here. She said that she did go to the house with Tabitha initially, and they did go in together because they were planning to cut off Laurie's hair. Now they're planning to cut off Laurie's hair. So she's not just saying water under the bridge. We're cool. Now they're going to do a prank and cut off Laurie's hair. So they go in together. Tabitha goes crazy, starts stabbing her, as I said. She runs out of the house, like I said. Now she's saying that when she ran out of the house, she ran into Lawrence, her now very abusive and very controlling boyfriend, who then told her to sit down and shut up, which she did because she always does what Lawrence says because he is the boss. And that he then went into the house and helped Tabitha finish the job. Now, this didn't really match witness testimonies though, because neighbors at the apartment complex said that at the time of the murders, they had seen two short women leaving the home, which were presumably Tabitha and Michelle, who were close to the same height, and not Tabitha and Lawrence, who were not. Michelle said during her trial that she initially covered for Lawrence because 1, she loved him, 2, he controlled her, and 3, she really believed that the whole thing was an accident. Don't know how she could, considering the story she told, but sure. And she was now at a point where she could no longer defend this horrible man because she no longer believed that this was an accident. And now she did have a little bit of evidence to kind of back up the theory that Lawrence had actually done it. And it was interesting because apparently Michelle wrote Lawrence a letter while they were both in prison. And in this letter, she wrote him a series of questions. I believe that was called the 29 questions document. And in one of these questions was odd. A lot of these questions were odd, and his answers were odd, to be honest. And one of the questions was are you sure that if I take the fall for you, I'm going to get less time? And he wrote back with yes, which is very strange if he wasn't involved. Why would he even say that? And apparently a handwriting expert did look into it, and it did appear that these were actually Lawrence's answers, that he did write her back with the answers in his handwriting. And honestly, that's the one thing that makes me go, that's kind of interesting. Not interesting enough for me to believe that Michelle didn't do it, but definitely makes me look at Lawrence a little harder. During the trial, there was physical evidence submitted that made Michelle look innocent, but also some that made Michelle look guilty. The thing that made her look guilty was the clothing that had been found behind the Kmart. There was a pair of sweatpants in there that belonged to Michelle that were covered in Laurie's blood, even though they had washed it. You can't get rid of all the blood. And they were like, see, she wore these at the time of the murder. And they tried to say that these pants belonged to Lawrence at one point, but they had Lawrence like hold them up in front of them, and they were like several inches too short for his legs. So they're like, nice try, but clearly no. But the thing that made her not look guilty is a letter that she had written to Lawrence in prison, where she wrote to him and saying, and I quote, "I know I'm not an angel, but Lawrence, I never got mad enough to kill." In the end, Lisa Michelle Lambert was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy, and she was given life in prison without the possibility of parole as opposed to the death penalty, because the judge figured due to her age and her lack of criminal record, she would be more useful to the world if she was still alive. Tabitha's trial started 2 months later, and her attorneys filed a petition for her to be tried as a juvenile. And if it was successful, it would have taken the death penalty off the table, and also she could have gotten out in as little as 4 years. And her attorneys basically said that the reason she should be tried as a juvenile is because, one, she was 17 years old at the time of the murders, which technically is a juvenile, and two, she had no criminal record, and she was young enough that she could be put into a program where she could be rehabilitated during her time in prison and be rehabilitated and be a better person in society, as opposed to just throwing her in jail forever with no key. Wow, that was a good sentence. Heyo. In the end, her attorneys actually ended up withdrawing this petition because the prosecution agreed to take the death penalty off the table, and they thought that they'd have a pretty good chance of getting a good deal there. But it didn't quite go that way, because after 3 hours of deliberation, Tabitha was found guilty of second-degree murder and given life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Tabitha was led from the courthouse after being, found guilty, her mother, who was watching, was just crying hysterically, obviously, because she's losing her daughter too, obviously not in the same way, but it's not a fun time for anyone. And Hazel, Laurie's mother, even said of this, and I quote, "That's a mother and family sitting in there that loves their daughter just as much as I loved mine. It's not a happy day for any of us." Now, to fast forward here, quite a bit actually for Tabitha, in 2012, a decision was made by the U.S. Supreme Court where they deemed that life sentences against juvenile offenders were unconstitutional. This made it possible for Tabitha to get a new hearing, to be resentenced, and it could also make her eligible for parole. So Tabitha was resentenced, and she was subsequently given 28 years to life. And since at the time this happened, she had already served 26 of those years, she became eligible for parole in 2019 or 2020. And she did end up being released. She was released, obviously with conditions, as they always have. The conditions were she was not allowed to contact Laurie's family at all. She wasn't allowed to drive through, reside in, visit, like stay away from Lancaster County. You're not welcome here. She's not allowed to go there. And she has to take psychiatric medication. The Lancaster County DA's office released a statement regarding Tabitha's release, and that statement was, and I quote, "The resentencing of juvenile murderers has been one of the most difficult and gut-wrenching tasks we have ever had to handle. Our system told victims' families their case was over, and in many cases, for decades. The courts ruled, and we follow the law, but that in no way diminishes the added emotional trauma this process has caused to those who have already suffered. Most of all, we must remember the innocent victims whose lives were taken have no ability to appeal or receive a new sentence." Laurie's mother read a statement and said to Tabitha directly, and I quote, "Laurie died a horrible death for reasons that I will never understand. Why did you agree to come to our house that morning?" Now Lawrence, remember, he had made a deal with the prosecution. Well, apparently he lied about something and he got his deal taken away from him. So he ended up having to plead no contest to third-degree murder, and he got 10 to 20 years in prison. And I could not figure out what he lied about, but I want to know what he lied about, because there's so much weirdness for me around Lawrence. And I want to know what he lied about, but I couldn't figure that out. I found a lot out, but I couldn't figure that out. So now let's fast forward a bit for Lawrence. When Lawrence was released, because spoiler alert, Lawrence was released by now, he was only 32 years old and had only served 12 years for his part in the crime, which was, quote, driving the getaway car for Michelle and Tabitha. This was the third time that Lawrence had applied for parole or attempted to get paroled, and he was finally, it was granted, and Hazel was very disappointed with their decision to let him out. Lawrence's probation ended on the 20th anniversary of Laurie's death. And apparently, Lawrence was ordered to pay Laurie's family the sum of $12,000, a whopping $12,000 in restitution. But the last report I saw said he still owed a great deal of that and that the family would just get random payments here and there. After the murder, Laurie's mother, Hazel, spent about a year gathering signatures for a petition to have legislation passed to have stronger anti-stalking laws added to her area. And from her work, Pennsylvania did just that. Legislation was signed into effect in 1993 that outlawed stalking. And she said of this, quote, "Laurie was my life. I had to do something." And man, that really does sound like it should be the end of the story, right? Like, all have been arrested. Some have been released. We know who did it. Seems pretty clear. But look at how much time's left of this video. We're not even almost done. Well, we might be. We're kind of almost done, but we're not done yet. There's still so much to go because shit's about to go down. Michelle Lambert filed many appeals during her time in captivity, and one was finally successful when it passed by a judge, when it was recognized by a judge in Philadelphia, where she was born and raised. No. This was in 1996 when she wrote a letter to this federal judge essentially stating that she was being unjustly held in prison, that she was innocent, and that she had proof. She cited 29 documents where Lawrence had essentially taken responsibility for the murder and where she had written to him that she was covering for him. Michelle ended up getting an attorney, and the attorney believed that she was railroaded also. She believed that it was crazy that Lawrence had gotten such a sweet deal when there was just as much implicating him, just as much evidence implicating him as there was Michelle. And according to this attorney, Lawrence had even told a coworker the day before the murders that he was never coming back to work because he was going to murder a girl and get arrested for it. Her new attorneys also presented information that suggested that Michelle was a woman suffering from battered woman's syndrome. That Lawrence was a very abusive man, and that Michelle did whatever she could to make Lawrence happy because that's what she was conditioned to do, and that's why she had taken the fall for him in the first place. They said that Lawrence was very abusive, and she cited many, many times that Lawrence had beaten her or raped her. And in addition to that, she told her In addition to that, Michelle and her attorney were now saying that 6 months prior to the murder, Michelle had been gang raped by, I believe it was 3 police officers. And that Michelle being arrested and the evidence pointing to Michelle as the murderer was part of an elaborate conspiracy to frame her for these officers to protect themselves from what they had done to her. So Michelle ended up being granted a new hearing. And at that time, her new attorneys found a ton of things that were wrong and unconstitutional in her initial trial because they were now given access to everything. And they found that there was a ton of evidence that made Michelle look better, like it was more favorable for her, but the police and the prosecution did not give that over to the defense during the discovery process, and that's a big no-no. Again, during this new hearing, Michelle and her attorney said that it wasn't Michelle who was guilty, that it was actually Tabitha and Lawrence who had committed the crime, and that she was being framed. And she said that she had only initially admitted to being part of it at all because Lawrence was an abusive man, and that she did whatever Lawrence said. By this time, Michelle had started going by Lisa, and she had grown out her hair dark, and she had just totally tried to reinvent herself as this innocent, unjustly held woman who was just trying to do what she could to protect her abuser and her baby. And what sucks is that Laurie Show's mother, Hazel, even ended up actually giving a little bit of information at this hearing that was favorable. She didn't mean to. It wasn't what she was trying to do, but she actually did testify that she saw Lawrence Youngkin near her home the day of the murder. And this helped put the idea in the judge's mind that it could have been Lawrence. She was saying it was Lawrence, and now Laurie's mom was saying that Lawrence was there, so it kind of strengthened what the defense was saying. And speaking of Laurie's mother, Hazel felt that this judge was super biased from the beginning. She said that she felt like from day one that this judge was on Michelle's side and was just looking for a reason to release her. But with that said, the police had withheld this information. And this was information that would be super useful at Michelle's trial, and it would have shown that Lawrence could have been there, and it could have raised reasonable doubt. The judge ended up claiming that the misconduct was ridiculous and Lisa Michelle Lambert was released. Lisa said of the murder, I'm going to go back and forth between Lisa and Michelle because she's going back and forth between Lisa and Michelle. Lisa Michelle Lambert said of the murder, and I quote, "I'm sorry that she died. And if I would have thought that anything like that would have happened on December 20th, I never would have gotten out of bed." The judge in Lisa Michelle Lambert's hearing claimed that the Lancaster County had, quote, "made a pact with the devil," and that the prosecutor's misconduct had violated Michelle's rights for due process, and he straight up barred the state from ever trying her for murder again. He was like, guess what, Pennsylvania? Fuck around and find out. And damn, dude, that's so wild. I've never heard of that happening, and people were not having it. People thought that he was overstepping by saying that, like, the state could never retry her again because technically they should legally be able to do so. And Laurie's family even tried to get him impeached. Whatever you do to get rid of it. Recalled. They tried to get this judge recalled. They ended up collecting 37,000 signatures, so a lot of people agreed with them, and 6 states joined Pennsylvania in filing a brief to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals because they also disagreed with the judge's ruling that the state could never retry Michelle. It was just a very messy and controversial move on his part. And the Court of Appeals ended up agreeing with them, saying that Michelle should have never had that hearing done in federal court anyway. It needed to be done at a state level. And an investigation was done in the misconduct that they were saying had happened in her initial trial. And it was found that there wasn't enough evidence to support that to arrest anybody for that misconduct. So after 10 months of freedom, Lisa Michelle Lambert was rearrested. She was put back in prison so that she could await trial in the appropriate courthouse system. The prosecution this time tried to show how completely unbelievable the idea of Michelle being framed actually was because of the amount of people who would have to be involved, many of whom who did not know each other and would have no reason to lie for each other. Additionally, they claimed that the reason for a conspiracy and a cover-up was ridiculous. They said that the story of the gang rape was likely untrue, that it probably didn't happen because Michelle had a boy who cries wolf syndrome, and she essentially had blamed several people from the time she was in captivity of raping her. We will get into that a little more later because there might be a little truth to at least some of it, but this is what they were saying. Michelle did end up getting a new trial date, as I said, and she was released for a short period of time during this because it was believed that she was probably going to get out again because of what was happening with the trial. And at this trial, there was a new witness who testified to the fact that he had known Michelle pretty well and that he had seen her and Lawrence's relationship and that Lawrence was abusive and was controlling, and he saw a difference in Michelle in the time that she was with him and that he could corroborate that she would do anything to protect Lawrence because that is how their relationship was. And he also testified that at one point he and Michelle had been at like a fair together, and he had seen a cop who fit the description of one of the cops who Michelle had said had gang raped her, and that this cop was giving her an intimidating glare. A, quote, threatening stare. So in 1998, her new trial officially began, and it was heard before the same judge who had found her guilty last time. And Michelle was like, listen, I didn't do it. It wasn't me. I'm not guilty. I was covering for Lawrence. It was actually Lawrence who did everything. Lawrence was choking Laurie. I was there. He was choking Laurie, and he told me to leave, and I did just that because I do what Lawrence says. So now she wasn't involved, and instead of meeting Lawrence outside and being told to wait outside, she was inside with him, and he was actively choking Laurie and told her to leave. That's the new story. There's a lot of stories from her. That's the thing, is there's so many different stories coming from Michelle that I'm like, girl, how do you expect anyone to believe you when you change your story every 15 minutes? Michelle's attorney told the court the same thing they had at the previous hearing, that Michelle was gang raped by a group of cops 6 months prior to the murder, and that the whole thing was a conspiracy against her to frame her. Michelle's attorneys also claimed, okay, this is fucking crazy. They claimed that these cops, and I'm all for believing that cops could set up crimes, like we see it happens, but this is so fucking stupid. Her attorneys are claiming that these cops were so dead set on framing Michelle for Laurie's murder that they went and took Laurie's body out of the morgue, brought her back to the crime scene, staged her body on the floor, and took new photos of the crime scene that would make that would implicate Michelle more. And to me, that's just so fucking crazy. Like, it's such... You might want to stretch before you take that fucking leap, because that is just absolutely bananas to me. But that is what they were saying. And the cops were like, no, like, we didn't do that. They obviously denied everything. They denied taking her body from the morgue to take new crime scene photos. And of course they denied the gang rape. And one of the cops that Michelle claimed had raped her actually ended up showing proof that at the time that she said she was raped, he was out of the state on his honeymoon. So, doesn't sound like it happened, but I mean, I don't know. Tabitha ended up testifying at Michelle's new trial as well, and I believe this was actually the first time that she told her side of the story out loud, if I remember correctly. 99% sure. And she told the court that she was testifying because it was the right thing to do. She told the court that she had been there and that she had even helped restrain Laurie, so she did implicate herself as an accomplice, but she said that she did not kill Laurie. She did not stab Laurie. That was all Michelle. She also spoke to Michelle's callousness, saying that once Laurie was already down on the ground, stabbed, hurt, bleeding, that she knelt down beside her and cut her throat, sawing back and forth like she was, quote, cutting a loaf of bread. That's the way she described it. And that Michelle just didn't care. She just didn't care about anything. She was just like, you're not going to take my man. And that's what she did. And to illustrate that Tabitha was saying that she was involved, is she said that, like, when Laurie tried to run out of the room, she did block the door to make it so that she couldn't leave. And she did hold her legs while Michelle was killing her. So she said that she could see right into Laurie's throat after the slashing, and that she was making a, quote, whooshing sound. This is a child, dude. It's so fucked up. Tabitha also reiterated that Lawrence was not there. Lawrence was not involved in the murder. She'd have no real reason to protect Lawrence. There's nothing that she's going to gain from not implicating Lawrence. So I don't know why she would lie here, but she said, like, Lawrence wasn't there. This is just Michelle's way of trying to deflect blame and trying to make it seem like it wasn't her, but that Michelle was a totally on board, active participant, and that she had even told Tabitha prior to the crime to, like, pull her hair up, not wear makeup, not wear nail polish, to not leave evidence. And during all of this testimony, Laurie's parents were there. They sat in the back row of the courthouse and sobbed through the entire thing, because I cannot imagine hearing all of that about your kid, but I also can't imagine not going. So in the end, the judge did decide that Michelle was still guilty and she would remain in prison. And the judge even stated that even if he believed her story, she was still guilty of first-degree murder as an accomplice anyways. Michelle said of Laurie's murder, and I quote, "I do not believe in any way that I am responsible for the death of Laurie Show. The police in East Area Township and the prosecution's office blamed me for a murder I did not commit." Hazel, Laurie's mother, said of Michelle, and I quote, "Michelle's the one who cut Laurie's throat. Michelle deserves to have a miserable, long life in prison. Not special treatment. There's nothing special about her. She's just evil." Lisa Michelle Lambert appeared in court to sue the correctional institution over claims that she was raped and assaulted by state prison staff in 1996. Her attorney argued that the institution had done nothing to stop the assaults, and in the end, she did end up receiving a $35,000 settlement. And the guard that she was claiming had assaulted her ended up going to jail, and he served 1.5 to 3 years in prison. So, when I said there might be something to the rape allegations, that's what I mean. Because, I mean, why would the officer end up serving any time? And why would the state agree to pay her $35,000 if there wasn't at least some truth to that claim? In 2005, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear Michelle's case. And with that, all of her appeals had been exhausted. So the legal proceedings for Michelle are kind of done. Like, you have so many appeals, and once you exhaust all those appeals, there's not much more you can do. And that's kind of where she's at right now. She's tried and she's tried and she's tried. She tried so hard to lose it all. And in the end, it doesn't even matter. She is in jail, and it doesn't seem like she's getting out anytime soon. And the last report I saw on Hazel, Laurie's mother, is that she's still living in the same apartment. Even though that must be really hard for her, she said that it just feels like she's there, and that she can sense that she's there anytime she sees, like, a light flicker or the vacuum switch turn on and off, or, like, or like a flicker on the TV set. She says that she feels like her daughter is there, so she stays there. She said of this, and I quote, "It makes you more comfortable to think that she's nearby. I know technically she's in heaven, but sometimes I think she's saying, quote, 'Hey mom, I'm still here. I'm watching out for you.'" And I didn't find many quotes from Laurie's father, John, but I did find one, and I want to end this case with this quote because I feel like it's a really good representation of the ripple effect that these murders can have. It's very sad, and it just shows you that these people who kill people don't just make victims of the people they murder, but they make victims out of everyone who loves this person. John said of losing his only child, and I quote, "It hurts. I see people who have children, family. Hazel and I don't have any grandchildren. It's tough, and it hurts." And with that quote, that, my friends, is the story of the murder of 16-year-old Laurie Show. Isn't that just such a wild ride? Like, what do you think? What was the first thought you had? Because I went all over the place with this. I definitely think Michelle did it. I don't really question that aspect that much. And I don't really question it at all, actually, because, like, Michelle seemed deeply unhinged. Just based on all of her prior actions, it seems very, very clear that she did this, that she had a deep-seated hatred for Laurie. And I also get the impression that she was just like a very deeply insecure person. I didn't mention during this telling of the story about Michelle's looks, even though when you look into this case, you see it reported a lot, because Michelle was a naturally pretty person, right? She had like dark hair. She was like a good looking human being, but she like bleached her hair to shit, and she wore like these color contacts that turned her brown eyes blue, and she wore like a ton of makeup. And I'm not saying that changing yourself that much physically is an indication solely of being insecure with yourself, but that combined with this like intense insecurity about a 16-year-old child, where you were that worried that that's such a threat to you and your relationship that you kill her for it, those two combined lead me down the path that makes me believe that she's a very insecure human being. I do think it's possible that Lawrence was more involved. Maybe not with actually being there or helping commit the murders, but definitely with like egging his girlfriend Michelle on. I mean, he like drove her to the mall that day where she got out and like slammed her head into a car. I could see Lawrence doing that, and I could see him having a motive to do that, especially since Laurie had said that he raped her. He definitely would have a reason not to want her around, and so I can see him like sort of fanning the flames that already existed inside Michelle to get her to do what he wants. But in the end, I do think that Michelle is the one who did it, and I think that she's exactly where she belongs. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Do you think Michelle is guilty? Do you think Lawrence is more involved? Do you think it's fair that Lawrence and Tabitha are already out of jail? Tell me everything you think down below. I need to know your opinions because this case is insane. But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope you found it interesting and informative, and it gave you all of the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I want to thank you for hanging out and remembering Laurie with me today. She was just such a young girl, and I know that it's like a me thing because the older I get, the younger a 16-year-old seems, and that's just like an actual child, dude. She was literally in her bathroom getting ready for her last day before Christmas break. Just a kid killed in her home. Can you even imagine that? Like, it's just horrifying, and for no reason at all. And like, fuck, man, like right before Christmas, these people murdered Laurie and ruined her family's lives. They will never be the same again. Christmas can never be the same for them again. This girl is gone forever because of this stupid shit over a relationship that no longer exists, and it's just like very fucking dumb, and it makes me mad, and it's really sad. But anyways, guys, please let me know down below of any cases you would like to see me cover in the future. As this case indicates, if you leave me suggestions, eventually I will try to get to them. And if I cover a case that you recommended, I will try to give you a shout out because I know you're good. I know you're good. I like to look into the cases that you're into because I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste. Otherwise, you would not be here. Of course, if you haven't already, don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell because I want to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you. And if you want to hang out more consistently, you can follow me on all my social media. It'll all be listed down below. I have an Instagram, I have Twitter, I have a Facebook page, and I have a Facebook group. And I like talking to you guys over there. There will also be a link to my merch store. I'm not wearing my merch right now, I'm wearing my friend's merch, but if you want some merch, I've made some merch, and it's some pretty cool merch. Take a shot every time I say merch. Don't do that. Or do. I'm not your real mom. But anyways, guys, I'm gonna leave before I say some more stupid shit, because like my brain is on a one right now. This baby's stealing all of my brain cells. But anyways, thank you for being here. When you could literally be anywhere else in the world, that is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday. I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.